Hello and welcome to another episode of the English Globe. I'm Adam, and joining me, as always, is Julia. Today, we're exploring a topic that has shaped the Middle East for decades: the power struggle between Iran and Saudi Arabia. This is not a simple rivalry. It's a complex web of history, politics, religion, economics, and global strategy. Over the next hour, we'll break down the facts, explore the perspectives, and keep the conversation fair and balanced so you can form your own opinions based on real, verified information.
That's right, Adam. The Iran-Saudi Arabia relationship has often been described as a tug-of-war for influence in the Middle East. It's a rivalry that has deep roots, going back to changes in political systems, religious identities, and geopolitical alliances over the last century. These two countries are not just important because of their size or location. They also hold massive reserves of oil, which makes them vital players in the global economy. What happens between them can have ripple effects across the world.
Before we dive into the details, a quick reminder for our listeners. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit the like button and subscribe to the English Globe. Your support helps us create more in-depth discussions like this one. And in the comments below, tell us where you are listening from and share your opinions on today's topic. Are you hearing this podcast from the Middle East, from Asia, from Europe, or somewhere else entirely? We would love to know your location and perspective.
Let's start by explaining why this topic matters so much. The rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia isn't just a local issue. It's a global one. Their competition influences conflicts in other countries, affects oil prices, and even shapes international diplomacy. If tensions rise between these two nations, the consequences can be felt everywhere from the streets of Beirut to energy markets in New York, London, and Beijing. That's why understanding the background is so important for anyone interested in world affairs.
What makes this relationship unique is that it's not simply about territory or military strength. It's about ideology, identity, and influence. Iran presents itself as a leader for Shia Muslims across the world, while Saudi Arabia positions itself as the heart of Sunni Islam and the custodian of its holiest sites. This religious distinction often overlaps with political goals, which adds another layer of complexity. We'll be exploring these dimensions in detail as we move through the episode.
It's also important to note that while religion plays a role, this is not purely a theological dispute. Both nations have economic ambitions, security concerns, and long-term strategic visions for the Middle East. Sometimes those visions align with other countries' interests, and sometimes they don't. For example, both Iran and Saudi Arabia rely heavily on oil exports, but they often compete for the same markets, influencing how they engage with the rest of the world.
The other reason this rivalry has captured so much attention is its connection to global powers like the United States, China, and Russia. These external players often have their own stakes in the region, whether it's access to oil, arms sales, or maintaining influence. That means the Iran-Saudi relationship doesn't just affect their neighbors. It can alter the balance of power in global politics. We'll also touch on how these alliances have shifted over the years.
In today's episode, we'll take you through 10 sections, starting with the history of Iran-Saudi Arabia relations, then moving into the religious and political systems, their economic competition, the proxy conflicts they are involved in, and their ties with major global powers. We'll also talk about recent attempts at reconciliation, possible future scenarios, and what the world can expect from this complex relationship. The aim is to give you a clear, unbiased understanding.
And just to be clear, our goal here is not to take sides. We're not here to say one country is right and the other is wrong. We're here to explore facts, historical records, and credible analyses so you can see the full picture. We believe that a neutral, well-informed discussion helps build understanding, even on sensitive topics. So as you listen, keep an open mind, think critically, and compare what you hear today with other reliable sources.
By the end of this episode, we hope you'll not only understand the roots of this rivalry, but also see how it continues to shape politics, economics, and security across the Middle East and beyond. And once again, if you haven't already, please hit like on this video, subscribe to the English Globe, and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what you think about today's discussion. Your insights make our conversations richer and more engaging.
To understand the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, we first need to step back and look at the history before tensions became as intense as they are today. In the mid-20th century, both Iran and Saudi Arabia were monarchies with close ties to the West, especially the United States and the United Kingdom. Iran, under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, and Saudi Arabia, ruled by King Faisal at the time, were part of a U.S.-aligned network in the region. While there were differences in governance, both nations shared an interest in stability and maintaining their positions as key oil exporters.
During the 1950s and 1960s, Iran and Saudi Arabia were not locked in open hostility. In fact, their relationship was shaped more by cooperation than by rivalry. They were both founding members of OPEC in 1960, working together to influence global oil prices and ensure a steady income for their economies. Iran, with its large population and ambitious modernization projects, saw oil wealth as a path to becoming a regional superpower. Saudi Arabia, with its smaller population but vast reserves, focused on building infrastructure and consolidating the House of Saud's rule.
One key factor in their relatively smooth relations during this era was the shared concern about regional instability caused by Arab nationalism, especially under Egypt's President Gamal Abdel Nasser. Nasser's vision of pan-Arab unity challenged monarchies in the Gulf, and both Iran and Saudi Arabia opposed his influence. Despite Iran not being an Arab nation, the Shah saw Nasser's revolutionary ideas as a threat to his monarchy, just as Saudi Arabia did. This mutual interest brought the two closer together, at least in a strategic sense.
However, the turning point came in 1979. The Iranian Revolution overthrew the Shah and replaced his pro-Western monarchy with an Islamic republic under the leadership of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. This was not just a change in leadership. It was a complete transformation in ideology and foreign policy. Khomeini's government rejected Western influence and positioned itself as the champion of Shia Muslims worldwide. His rhetoric also directly challenged the legitimacy of monarchies in the Muslim world, including the Saudi royal family.
The revolution sent shockwaves across the Middle East. For Saudi Arabia, the sudden rise of an Islamic government in Iran was alarming, not only because it replaced a key ally of the West, but also because it promoted a revolutionary model that could inspire dissent among Saudi Arabia's own population. The kingdom, being the guardian of Islam's holiest sites, saw itself as the leader of the Muslim world. Iran's new leadership contested that claim, introducing a religious rivalry alongside the emerging political tensions.
This was also the era when the Sunni-Shia divide became more visible in geopolitics. While the theological differences between Sunni and Shia Islam had existed for over 1,000 years, they were now being used as part of political identity. Iran's Shia leadership began building alliances with Shia communities in Lebanon, Iraq, and Bahrain, while Saudi Arabia invested heavily in promoting Sunni religious institutions and supporting Sunni-led governments or movements. These developments created a deeper fault line in regional politics.
The 1980s added fuel to the rivalry. Just a year after the Iranian Revolution, the Iran-Iraq War began. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, invaded Iran with the support of several Arab states, including Saudi Arabia. The kingdom provided financial backing to Iraq, viewing the war as a way to contain Iran's revolutionary expansion. For Iran, this support from Saudi Arabia confirmed that the kingdom was working against it. The 8-year war was brutal and costly, leaving deep scars in Iran's national memory.
At the same time, Saudi Arabia was also dealing with its own internal challenges. In 1979, the Grand Mosque in Mecca was seized by militants, shocking the kingdom and prompting the royal family to reinforce its religious credentials. The government doubled down on conservative Islamic policies, which also meant increasing support for religious institutions abroad. This expanded Saudi Arabia's global religious influence, often in competition with Iran's own outreach to Shia communities. The rivalry was no longer just regional, it was global in scope.
By the end of the Iran-Iraq War in 1988, the geopolitical map of the Middle East had shifted. Iran was isolated, under economic strain, and viewed with suspicion by many of its neighbors. Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, had strengthened its ties with the United States, especially during the Gulf War of 1990 to 1991, when U.S. troops were stationed in the kingdom to help defend it against Saddam Hussein's forces after Iraq invaded Kuwait. This further cemented Saudi Arabia's alignment with Western powers, a position Iran opposed.
It's worth noting that, despite their hostility, there were moments of attempted dialogue. In the 1990s, under Iranian President Mohammad Khatami, relations saw a brief improvement. Both sides engaged in diplomatic exchanges, and there was cautious optimism about reducing tensions. However, these efforts were fragile. Regional conflicts, shifts in leadership, and the continued competition for influence meant that underlying mistrust remained strong. Any step forward was often followed by setbacks.
Looking at this period from the 1950s to the early 2000s, we can see the transformation from cautious cooperation to open rivalry. The change was driven by ideological shifts, regional conflicts, and global alliances. The pre-revolutionary era was defined by shared interests and common concerns, while the post-revolution era became a stage for competing visions of leadership in the Muslim world. This historical context is essential for understanding why their rivalry continues to shape Middle Eastern politics today.
Exactly. And as we move into the next part of our discussion, we'll explore how the religious dimension has influenced this rivalry. While it's often oversimplified as a Sunni-Shia conflict, the reality is far more complex. Religion has been intertwined with politics, identity, and regional strategy in ways that go beyond theological debate. In Section 3, we'll unpack these layers and see how religious affiliation has become both a tool and a symbol in the Iran-Saudi competition for influence. When people hear about Iran and Saudi Arabia's rivalry, one of the first explanations they often hear is that it's simply a Sunni-Shia conflict. While there's truth in the fact that these are the two main branches of Islam, reducing the rivalry to only this difference oversimplifies a much more complex story. The religious divide is real, but it has been shaped and intensified by politics, history, and strategic ambitions. To understand its role, we first need to clarify what these terms mean and how they influence identity.
Sunni and Shia Islam share the same core beliefs in one God, the Prophet Muhammad as his messenger, the Quran as the holy book, and the basic practices of the faith. The split dates back to a disagreement over leadership succession after the Prophet's death in the 7th century. Sunnis believed leadership should be chosen from the Prophet's companions, while Shias believed it should remain within the Prophet's family, starting with his cousin and son-in-law, Ali. This historical disagreement grew into theological and cultural distinctions over centuries.
In today's Middle East, these religious differences are not simply theological debates. They have become part of political identity. Iran, as a majority Shia nation, sees itself as the defender and promoter of Shia communities across the world. Saudi Arabia, as the birthplace of Islam and the custodian of its holiest cities, Mecca and Medina, sees itself as the leader of Sunni Islam. This creates a natural point of competition for influence over the global Muslim population, even if both countries deny seeking outright domination.
It's important to note that in the years before the 1979 Iranian Revolution, this religious rivalry was not as politically visible. Iran's monarchy was secular in nature, and religious identity was not the primary driver of foreign policy. The revolution changed this dynamic dramatically. The new Islamic Republic placed religion at the heart of its governance and foreign policy, with the supreme leader holding both religious and political authority. This allowed Iran to position itself as a religious alternative to monarchies in the Muslim world.
Saudi Arabia's system is also deeply tied to religion, though in a different way. It's an absolute monarchy that derives much of its legitimacy from its alliance with the Wahhabi religious establishment, a conservative interpretation of Sunni Islam. This partnership has shaped Saudi society and its approach to religious outreach globally. The kingdom has spent decades funding mosques, schools, and religious programs abroad, which has extended its influence far beyond its borders, often in competition with Iran's Shia-oriented outreach.
Religious identity also influences alliances and conflicts. In Lebanon, Iran has supported Hezbollah, a Shia political and military movement. In contrast, Saudi Arabia has backed Sunni political factions there. In Iraq, after the fall of Saddam Hussein, Shia-majority governments received strong backing from Iran, while Saudi Arabia maintained ties with Sunni leaders. In Yemen, Iran supports the Houthi movement, which is rooted in the Zaydi branch of Shia Islam, while Saudi Arabia leads a coalition backing the internationally recognized Sunni-aligned government.
While these alliances are often framed as purely sectarian, it's worth emphasizing that politics and strategy often outweigh religious doctrine. For example, Iran has sometimes supported Sunni groups when it aligns with its political goals, and Saudi Arabia has worked with Shia actors under certain conditions. This shows that while religion is a powerful identity marker, it's also a flexible tool in the hands of political leaders seeking influence in the region and beyond.
Religious leadership also plays a role in shaping foreign policy narratives. In Iran, the supreme leader, currently Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, holds the highest authority, guiding both domestic and international policies with a mix of religious and political reasoning. In Saudi Arabia, the king holds the title of custodian of the two holy mosques, reinforcing the monarchy's religious legitimacy. These titles are not just symbolic. They strengthen each country's claim to leadership in the Muslim world.
This competition for religious authority is one of the reasons why reconciliation between the two has been so difficult. It's not just about signing treaties or settling border disputes. It's about two very different visions for the role of religion in governance and society. For Iran, the model is a revolutionary Islamic republic that blends clerical leadership with political power. For Saudi Arabia, it's a monarchy that rules with the endorsement of a religious establishment rooted in conservative Sunni thought.
In addition, religious events can sometimes become flashpoints in the rivalry. The annual Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca has occasionally been a source of tension, especially when Iranian pilgrims have been involved in protests or when tragic incidents have led to large numbers of casualties. Each side has used such incidents to reinforce its narrative about the other, further deepening mistrust. These moments reveal how religious spaces and rituals can be drawn into political disputes.
In the end, while religion is a key dimension of the Iran-Saudi Arabia rivalry, it cannot be separated from political, economic, and strategic factors. The Sunni-Shia divide is part of the picture, but it's also a tool used to mobilize support, justify alliances, and frame foreign policy objectives. Understanding this complexity helps us see why the rivalry persists and why solutions that focus only on theology will not resolve the deeper political realities driving it.
That's why in our next section, we're going to move beyond religion and look at the political systems of Iran and Saudi Arabia, how they govern, how their leaders rise to power, and how their domestic politics shape their foreign policy will give us another layer of understanding. These differences in governance are not just internal matters. They directly influence how each country interacts with its neighbors and the wider world.
Understanding the political systems of Iran and Saudi Arabia is essential to grasp why their foreign policies differ so much. These systems are rooted in very different historical developments and ideological foundations. Iran operates as an Islamic republic, blending theocratic and republican elements, while Saudi Arabia functions as an absolute monarchy with no formal constitution in the Western sense. These structures shape how decisions are made, how leaders gain legitimacy, and how each nation views its role in the world.
Let's start with Iran. Following the 1979 revolution, the country adopted a system where ultimate authority rests with the supreme leader, a position held by a senior Shia cleric. The supreme leader oversees the armed forces, the judiciary, state broadcasting, and has the final say on foreign policy. Alongside this role, Iran also has an elected president and parliament, but their powers are limited by oversight from unelected bodies like the Guardian Council, which ensures that laws align with Islamic principles and revolutionary values.
Elections in Iran are competitive but heavily controlled. Candidates for parliament or the presidency must be approved by the Guardian Council, meaning only those aligned with the political and religious establishment can run. This creates a balance where popular participation exists, but within boundaries set by the ruling clerics. Critics argue this limits political diversity, while supporters say it protects the Islamic nature of the state. Either way, this hybrid system ensures that religious authority remains at the core of governance.
Saudi Arabia's system, by contrast, is centered entirely on the royal family. The king serves as both head of state and head of government, supported by a council of ministers. There are no national elections for leadership positions, and political parties are banned. Instead, governance is built on loyalty to the monarchy, with senior roles often filled by members of the royal family. The king also holds the title of custodian of the two holy mosques, linking political authority directly to religious legitimacy.
Decision-making in Saudi Arabia is concentrated in the hands of the king and a small circle of advisors. In recent years, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has become a dominant figure in shaping domestic and foreign policy. His Vision 2030 reform plan aims to diversify the economy and modernize aspects of society, though it has also been accompanied by tighter political controls. The kingdom's political stability is maintained through a mix of tribal alliances, religious authority, and economic benefits from oil revenues.
These two systems naturally lead to different foreign policy approaches. In Iran, the presence of multiple power centers, the supreme leader, the president, the Revolutionary Guard, means foreign policy can be influenced by competing priorities. For example, while the president may seek improved relations with the West, the Revolutionary Guard might pursue a more confrontational strategy. In Saudi Arabia, policy tends to be more centralized, with fewer internal factions capable of challenging the king's authority on foreign matters.
Public participation also differs significantly. In Iran, citizens vote for representatives, and there is a visible political debate, even if it's within strict limits. In Saudi Arabia, public input comes more through informal channels, like tribal consultations or advisory councils, rather than through elections. Both systems claim to reflect the values of their societies, but they do so in fundamentally different ways. One emphasizing revolutionary religious leadership, the other emphasizing hereditary monarchy.
The way each country handles dissent is also shaped by its political structure. In Iran, protests can arise around election periods, economic issues, or social freedoms, and while the government allows some public expression, it often responds firmly to movements seen as threatening the Islamic system. In Saudi Arabia, political dissent is tightly restricted year-round, and criticism of the royal family or the religious establishment is considered a serious offense. Both governments frame these controls as necessary for stability.
These governance systems also affect economic management. Iran's political structure means that state-owned enterprises, including those controlled by the Revolutionary Guard, play a significant role in the economy. Decision-making is often influenced by ideological goals alongside economic needs. Saudi Arabia's economy is heavily tied to state-managed oil wealth, but reforms are aiming to encourage more private investment. Both nations use economic policy as a tool for strengthening domestic legitimacy and regional influence.
Internationally, these political differences create distinct styles of diplomacy. Iran often presents itself as a revolutionary state, challenging the status quo, appealing to movements that share its opposition to Western influence. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, positions itself as a stable partner for global powers, emphasizing economic cooperation and regional security. While both seek to expand their influence, the methods they use reflect their internal political realities and the narratives they promote about their legitimacy.
When we compare these systems side by side, it becomes clear that the Iran-Saudi rivalry is not only about ideology or religion, but also about governance models. Each nation believes its system best serves the Muslim world, and each views the other's model as flawed or even dangerous. This competition over political legitimacy feeds into their broader struggle for influence, making reconciliation more challenging because it's tied to questions about the very nature of leadership and authority.
And that's why, in the next section, we'll move into an area where their competition is most visible to the rest of the world: oil and economic influence. Both Iran and Saudi Arabia are major players in the global energy market, and their ability to shape oil prices and supply gives them significant leverage internationally. But it also creates points of tension, especially when their economic interests collide.
Oil is one of the most powerful tools in both Iran's and Saudi Arabia's arsenals, shaping not only their domestic economies, but also their influence on the global stage. These countries are two of the most significant oil producers in the world and key members of the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC. Their positions in this group allow them to impact global oil supply and prices, which in turn affects economies from Asia to Europe to North America.
Saudi Arabia holds the title of the world's largest crude oil exporter and often acts as OPEC's swing producer, meaning it can adjust its output quickly to stabilize markets or achieve strategic goals. This flexibility gives the kingdom enormous influence over global energy prices. Iran also possesses massive oil reserves, ranking among the largest in the world, but its ability to export freely has been restricted for decades by international sanctions, primarily imposed due to its nuclear program and regional policies.
For Saudi Arabia, oil wealth has been the foundation of its economic model for decades. Revenues from petroleum exports fund infrastructure projects, provide generous social benefits, and help maintain political stability by ensuring citizens enjoy a relatively high standard of living compared to other countries in the region. This dependence, however, has also led the kingdom to seek economic diversification through its Vision 2030 plan, which aims to expand industries such as tourism, technology, and renewable energy.
Iran's oil sector has faced a more complicated reality. The country's energy potential is vast, but sanctions have significantly limited its ability to sell crude on the open market. As a result, Iran has developed alternative strategies, such as finding unofficial buyers, trading oil for goods, or selling at discounted prices to allies like China. These methods allow Iran to maintain some revenue flow, but they also reduce the country's ability to influence global prices in the way Saudi Arabia can.
Competition within OPEC is another dimension of the rivalry. While the organization's goal is to coordinate oil policies among member states, Iran and Saudi Arabia have sometimes disagreed on production levels. Saudi Arabia often supports output increases when it benefits its strategic interests, even if it means lower prices, while Iran generally prefers to limit production to keep prices high, especially when sanctions restrict its export volume. These policy differences occasionally cause tension within the group.
Oil is not only an economic resource, it's a diplomatic tool. Saudi Arabia has long used its oil exports to strengthen relationships with major powers, particularly the United States, by ensuring a reliable supply. This has built a foundation for broader security and trade cooperation. Iran, in contrast, has used its oil to build ties with countries willing to defy U.S. sanctions, such as China, Syria, and Venezuela. In both cases, energy exports become part of broader foreign policy strategies.
Natural gas is another area of significance, though it receives less public attention. Iran holds the world's second-largest natural gas reserves and shares the massive South Pars field with Qatar. Saudi Arabia, while less dominant in gas, has been investing in its production to meet domestic demand and reduce oil consumption at home. The development of gas resources could become another front in their economic competition, especially as the world gradually moves toward cleaner energy sources.
The global energy transition is an important factor here. As more countries aim to reduce carbon emissions, demand for oil could decline over the coming decades. For Saudi Arabia, this adds urgency to its diversification efforts. For Iran, it means that sanctions combined with falling demand could significantly reduce future revenue potential. Both nations face the challenge of adapting their economies to a world where oil may no longer guarantee the same level of wealth and influence.
It's also worth noting that oil wealth can have domestic political implications. In Saudi Arabia, high oil prices often strengthen the government's ability to fund social programs and large-scale projects, boosting public approval. In Iran, fluctuations in oil revenue can directly affect inflation, unemployment, and the availability of imported goods, which can, in turn, influence public sentiment toward the government. Both nations know that economic stability is tied closely to their political legitimacy.
The rivalry in energy markets is therefore about more than just revenue. It's about who sets the tone in OPEC, who has leverage with global powers, and who can weather economic shifts better. Saudi Arabia's advantage lies in its capacity to influence supply quickly and maintain strong ties with major economies. Iran's strength lies in its vast reserves, strategic location, and resilience in finding markets despite sanctions. This economic competition is deeply intertwined with their broader geopolitical struggle.
In our next section, we'll examine one of the most visible arenas where this rivalry plays out: proxy conflicts and regional influence. While oil and economics provide the resources, it's in these regional battles, whether in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, or Lebanon, where Iran and Saudi Arabia often test each other's strength, shape political outcomes, and influence the balance of power across the Middle East.
One of the most prominent and complex features of the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia is their involvement in proxy conflicts across the Middle East. These proxy wars allow both countries to project power, support allied groups, and advance their political goals without engaging in direct military confrontation. This approach has made regional conflicts like those in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon arenas, where the two powers compete intensely, often with devastating humanitarian consequences.
The term proxy conflict refers to a situation where external powers support local groups or governments in a region to influence outcomes without direct involvement. For Iran and Saudi Arabia, proxy conflicts have become a strategic tool for asserting dominance. In Yemen, for example, Iran supports the Houthi movement, a group that follows the Zaidi Shia branch of Islam, providing them with weapons, training, and political backing. Saudi Arabia leads a coalition of countries fighting to restore the internationally recognized government, concerned about Iranian influence so close to its borders.
This war in Yemen is often described as the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with millions displaced, facing famine and disease. The conflict is not only a struggle for control within Yemen, but a symbol of the broader Iran-Saudi Arabia power contest. Both sides view Yemen as a crucial front line. For Saudi Arabia, it is about protecting its southern borders and preventing Iranian encroachment. For Iran, supporting the Houthis extends its influence on the Arabian Peninsula and sends a message to Saudi Arabia and its allies.
In Syria, the civil war that began in 2011 created another battleground for Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran has supported the government of Bashar al-Assad with financial aid, military advisors, and allied militias, including Hezbollah from Lebanon. This support helped Assad's forces regain control over much of the country. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, backed various opposition groups aiming to weaken Assad's government and reduce Iranian influence. The Syrian conflict illustrates how proxy dynamics can intertwine with local struggles and international geopolitics.
Lebanon presents a similar case. Iran's support for Hezbollah, a powerful Shia political party and militia, gives it significant sway in Lebanese politics and military affairs. Saudi Arabia has traditionally backed Sunni factions and sought to limit Hezbollah's power. The balance of influence in Lebanon reflects the broader Sunni-Shia and Iran-Saudi competition, affecting not just politics but also security and economic conditions. This proxy rivalry has contributed to Lebanon's instability and challenges in governance.
Iraq's situation is also shaped by these dynamics. After the 2003 US invasion, Iran expanded its influence by supporting Shia political parties and militias within the country. Saudi Arabia has maintained relationships with Sunni leaders and tribal groups, though its presence is less dominant than Iran's. This complex interplay has led to sectarian tensions and political fragmentation, with both countries seeking to shape Iraq's future in ways favorable to their strategic interests.
It's important to note that while these proxy conflicts often follow sectarian lines, the motivations go beyond religion. Strategic concerns, historical grievances, economic interests, and security considerations all play significant roles. Proxy warfare allows Iran and Saudi Arabia to engage in competition at a lower cost and with less risk than direct military conflict. However, it often prolongs instability and suffering in the affected countries, complicating efforts toward peace and reconstruction.
Beyond the battlefield, both nations engage in diplomatic and economic efforts to strengthen their regional influence. Saudi Arabia has invested heavily in aid programs, development projects, and political alliances with Gulf Cooperation Council members and other Arab states. Iran similarly cultivates alliances through cultural diplomacy, economic ties, and religious networks. These efforts aim to build loyal bases of support, project soft power, and counterbalance each other's presence in the region.
These proxy conflicts also attract involvement from external powers. The United States, Russia, and European countries have taken sides or engaged diplomatically based on their interests, further complicating the regional landscape. The involvement of these global actors sometimes aligns with Saudi Arabia or Iran, but often reflects broader strategic calculations, making the proxy battles multidimensional and difficult to resolve.
In recent years, some shifts have occurred. Ceasefires and peace talks, particularly in Yemen, have opened small windows for diplomacy, though trust between Iran and Saudi Arabia remains limited. Regional powers have expressed interest in reducing tensions, but deep-rooted rivalry and conflicting interests make any comprehensive resolution challenging. The humanitarian cost continues to rise as fighting persists in many areas affected by these proxy wars.
To sum up, proxy conflicts are a key manifestation of the Iran-Saudi rivalry. They allow both countries to pursue influence without direct confrontation, but at great cost to regional stability and civilian populations. Understanding these conflicts helps explain why the rivalry is so entrenched and why peace efforts require addressing not only local issues, but also the broader geopolitical competition between Tehran and Riyadh.
Next, we will explore the role of global powers such as the United States, China, and Russia in the Iran-Saudi Arabia rivalry. Their involvement impacts regional dynamics and international diplomacy, adding another layer to an already complex relationship.
When discussing the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, it is essential to understand the influence of major global powers, especially the United States, China, and Russia. These countries have significant strategic, economic, and political interests in the Middle East. Their policies and alliances shape how Iran and Saudi Arabia interact regionally and internationally. Each global power pursues its objectives, sometimes aligning with one side or both, and this external involvement adds complexity to the rivalry.
Starting with the United States, it has been a central player in the Middle East for decades, particularly through its close partnership with Saudi Arabia. This alliance is grounded in shared interests such as oil security, counterterrorism, and regional stability. The US maintains military bases and sells advanced weaponry to Saudi Arabia, reinforcing the kingdom's position in the region. At the same time, the US views Iran as a strategic adversary, primarily because of its nuclear program, support for militant groups, and opposition to US allies.
Since the 1979 Iranian Revolution and the subsequent hostage crisis, US-Iran relations have been tense and often hostile. Economic sanctions have been a major tool used by the US to limit Iran's nuclear ambitions and regional influence. These sanctions have significantly impacted Iran's economy, but have also contributed to Tehran's efforts to build stronger ties with countries like China and Russia. The US has also supported efforts to counter Iran's influence in conflicts such as those in Syria and Yemen, often aligning with Saudi Arabia and its allies.
China's role in the Middle East has grown rapidly in recent years, driven primarily by its need for energy resources and desire to expand its global economic influence. Unlike the US, China maintains relatively neutral relations with both Iran and Saudi Arabia. It imports large amounts of oil from both countries and invests heavily in infrastructure projects as part of its Belt and Road Initiative. China's approach tends to avoid direct political entanglement, focusing instead on trade and economic partnerships.
This pragmatic approach allows China to serve as a valuable partner and mediator at times. For example, in 2023, China helped broker talks aimed at reducing tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia, demonstrating its growing diplomatic role. China's interest lies in maintaining stability to protect its investments and energy supplies. Unlike the US, it generally refrains from imposing sanctions or military involvement, which makes it an attractive partner for both Tehran and Riyadh.
Russia is another significant player with a more assertive military and political presence in the Middle East. Its involvement in Syria, where it supports the Assad government alongside Iran, has increased its influence in the region. Russia maintains diplomatic and economic relations with both Iran and Saudi Arabia, carefully balancing its ties to benefit from the rivalry. It sells arms to both sides and participates in energy diplomacy through organizations like OPEC+.
Russia's strategy often aims to position itself as a power broker, capable of influencing regional outcomes while challenging US dominance. By engaging with both Iran and Saudi Arabia, Russia maximizes its leverage. It supports Iran's military presence in Syria and elsewhere, yet also maintains good relations with Saudi Arabia's leadership, including recent visits by Saudi officials to Moscow. This dual engagement reflects Russia's broader geopolitical goal of asserting itself as an indispensable actor in Middle Eastern affairs.
The involvement of these global powers shapes the Iran-Saudi Arabia rivalry in several ways. Firstly, it amplifies the stakes of their competition. The support and opposition from the US, China, and Russia affect military capabilities, economic resilience, and diplomatic maneuvering. Secondly, it complicates conflict resolution. Peace efforts must consider not only regional interests, but also the positions and goals of these external actors, making negotiations more challenging.
Thirdly, this external involvement contributes to the arms race in the region. Saudi Arabia's purchases of U.S. and European weaponry contrast with Iran's development of indigenous missile programs and acquisition of Russian technology. The flow of arms and military aid fuels tensions and makes proxy conflicts more intense. It also raises concerns about regional security and the potential for escalation.
Moreover, these powers influence international perceptions and media narratives about the rivalry. Western media often highlight US-Saudi cooperation and Iranian aggression, while Chinese and Russian outlets may offer different perspectives, emphasizing sovereignty and anti-intervention. This plurality of views shapes how global audiences understand the conflict and the options for its resolution.
An additional factor is the economic dimension. U.S. sanctions on Iran aim to curtail its oil exports and financial transactions, impacting Tehran's ability to fund its regional activities. China and Russia provide alternative avenues for trade and investment, helping Iran circumvent some sanctions. Saudi Arabia benefits from strong ties with Western economies, but faces challenges as global energy markets evolve with the push toward renewables.
In recent years, shifts in US policy have affected the dynamic as well. Changes in administration in Washington have led to varying approaches toward Iran, from attempts at nuclear agreements to increased sanctions. These policy swings create uncertainty and influence how Iran and Saudi Arabia strategize their relations with the US and each other. Meanwhile, China and Russia's steady engagement offers Tehran and Riyadh a measure of strategic balancing.
To summarize, the roles of the United States, China, and Russia are deeply intertwined with the Iran-Saudi Arabia rivalry. Each global power pursues its interests through alliances, diplomacy, economic ties, and military support, shaping the regional balance. Understanding their involvement helps explain why the rivalry remains so persistent and why regional stability depends in part on how these external actors engage with the Middle East.
Next, we will explore the efforts made by Iran and Saudi Arabia to reconcile differences through diplomacy. Despite decades of rivalry and conflict, there have been moments when both sides showed interest in dialogue. In Section 8, we will examine these attempts, the challenges they face, and the prospects for future peace.
Despite decades of intense rivalry and proxy conflicts, Iran and Saudi Arabia have occasionally taken steps toward diplomacy and dialogue. These efforts demonstrate that both countries recognize the high cost of prolonged tension and the potential benefits of easing hostilities. Diplomatic engagements have been driven by changes in regional dynamics, international pressure, and mutual economic interests. However, these attempts face significant obstacles rooted in deep mistrust and competing visions.
One notable diplomatic effort took place in the 1990s when Iran's reformist President Mohammad Khatami sought to improve relations with neighboring countries, including Saudi Arabia. During this period, some diplomatic exchanges and visits occurred, fostering cautious optimism. Nevertheless, the progress was limited by hardliners in both countries who viewed engagement with suspicion. The lack of a consistent political will prevented these early talks from leading to lasting agreements.
More recently, in 2016, tensions escalated sharply after Saudi Arabia executed a prominent Shia cleric, Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, a move strongly condemned by Iran. This incident led to the severing of diplomatic ties and heightened confrontations across the region. The breakdown of relations lasted for several years, reinforcing divisions and complicating regional conflicts. The closure of embassies and suspension of official communication underscored how fragile diplomatic channels had become.
Despite these setbacks, 2021 and 2023 witnessed renewed diplomatic overtures, notably with the facilitation of talks by China. These discussions aim to reduce tensions, reopen diplomatic missions, and find common ground on contentious regional issues. While the specifics of these negotiations remain confidential, public statements from both Tehran and Riyadh signaled a willingness to explore peaceful coexistence. These developments surprised many observers given the long history of animosity.
The motivations behind these recent diplomatic moves are multifaceted. Economic pressures, such as the impact of fluctuating oil prices and sanctions, have pushed both countries to consider the benefits of stability. Additionally, shifting geopolitical realities, including changing U.S. policies and the desire to reduce the risk of direct confrontation, have encouraged dialogue. Both Iran and Saudi Arabia also face domestic challenges that make prolonged conflict less desirable.
However, significant challenges remain. Deep-seated mistrust persists, fueled by decades of conflict and competing religious ideologies. Proxy wars continue in Yemen, Syria, and elsewhere, complicating peace efforts. Both countries maintain hardline elements within their political systems resistant to compromise. Furthermore, alliances with global powers introduce external pressures that can either facilitate or hinder reconciliation efforts, depending on broader strategic interests.
Another challenge is the question of regional leadership and influence. Both Iran and Saudi Arabia see themselves as essential powers in the Middle East, each offering a different vision for the future. Any reconciliation would require compromises on spheres of influence, a prospect that is difficult when both perceive the stakes as existential. This zero-sum mentality often blocks progress in negotiations, prolonging conflict cycles.
Additionally, domestic public opinion plays a role. Nationalist sentiments and religious narratives in both countries often frame the rivalry in zero-sum terms, making political leaders cautious about appearing weak or conciliatory. Media and political discourse can inflame tensions, reducing the political space for dialogue. Managing these perceptions is a delicate task that requires careful communication and confidence-building measures.
Despite these obstacles, the potential benefits of diplomacy are significant. Reduced tensions could lead to de-escalation in proxy conflicts, opening paths for humanitarian relief and reconstruction. Economic cooperation might flourish, benefiting both countries and the broader region. Improved security environments could attract foreign investment and boost tourism, contributing to diversification efforts in both economies.
International actors have also expressed support for dialogue, seeing it as essential for regional stability. The United Nations, the European Union, and countries like China have offered to mediate or facilitate talks. While their influence varies, their involvement underscores the global importance of resolving the Iran-Saudi rivalry. Successful diplomacy here could serve as a model for conflict resolution elsewhere.
In summary, diplomacy between Iran and Saudi Arabia remains a work in progress, marked by cautious optimism amid deep challenges. The efforts of recent years show that dialogue is possible, but durable peace requires addressing the root causes of mistrust, competing ambitions, and external influences. Continued engagement, confidence building, and willingness to compromise will be necessary for a meaningful breakthrough.
Next, in our following section, we will explore possible future scenarios for the Iran-Saudi Arabia rivalry. These scenarios will consider political, economic, and security dimensions, helping us understand what might lie ahead for the Middle East and the wider world.
Looking forward, the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia could evolve in several ways, depending on political decisions, regional developments, and international factors. The future is uncertain and complex, but considering possible scenarios helps us understand the opportunities and risks facing the Middle East. These scenarios range from continued conflict and rivalry to cautious cooperation or even transformative change, each with significant implications.
The first scenario is a continuation of the status quo, where proxy conflicts, diplomatic stalemates, and competition for regional influence persist. In this case, Tensions remain high, but do not escalate into direct conflict. Proxy wars in Yemen, Syria, and elsewhere continue, causing ongoing instability and humanitarian crises. Economic pressures and international sanctions limit Iran's capacity, while Saudi Arabia maintains strong alliances. This scenario suggests a prolonged rivalry with periodic flare-ups, but no major breakthrough.
A second scenario involves gradual de-escalation and limited cooperation. Here, both countries recognize the heavy costs of conflict and begin engaging in sustained diplomacy. Confidence-building measures, such as reopening embassies, reducing support for proxy groups, and initiating economic partnerships, might occur. While rivalry would not disappear entirely, pragmatic considerations could lead to a more stable coexistence. International actors would likely play supportive roles, encouraging dialogue and providing incentives for peace.
Another possibility is a dramatic shift in leadership or policy in one or both countries. Changes in ruling elites or significant political reforms could alter their foreign policy priorities. For example, a new government in Iran might adopt a less confrontational stance, or Saudi Arabia could pursue deeper regional integration and reconciliation. Such changes could open opportunities for more profound peace efforts, but would also face internal resistance from established power centers and conservative elements.
A fourth scenario is escalation into broader conflict. Although both countries have so far avoided direct military confrontation, misunderstandings, accidents, or provocations could trigger wider clashes. This could involve naval skirmishes in the Persian Gulf, missile attacks, or cyber warfare, further destabilizing the region and threatening global energy supplies. Escalation would have serious humanitarian and economic consequences, drawing in international powers and complicating peace efforts.
Technological and economic factors also influence these futures. The global energy transition toward renewable sources could reduce the strategic importance of oil, impacting both countries differently. Saudi Arabia's diversification efforts might bear fruit, while Iran could face greater economic challenges. Advances in missile and cyber technology may increase the risk of conflict, but also create new avenues for deterrence and negotiation. These dynamics will shape the rivalry in unexpected ways.
Domestic factors remain crucial. Public opinion, economic conditions, and social movements in both countries can influence foreign policy. Economic hardship or popular dissatisfaction might pressure leaders to adopt more conciliatory approaches, or conversely, to double down on nationalist rhetoric. The role of youth populations, access to information, and changing social norms add layers of complexity to how future relations unfold.
International diplomacy will also be key. The involvement of the United States, China, Russia, and regional actors can facilitate or hinder progress. Cooperative multilateral frameworks that address security, economic development, and cultural exchange may create conditions for lasting peace. Conversely, great power competition and proxy dynamics could perpetuate rivalry. Effective diplomacy will require patience, understanding, and addressing both immediate conflicts and long-term structural issues.
In conclusion, the Iran-Saudi Arabia rivalry is at a crossroads with multiple paths ahead. The choices made by leaders, influenced by internal and external pressures, will determine whether the region moves toward stability, continued conflict, or transformation. For observers and policymakers, understanding these scenarios highlights the importance of dialogue, restraint, and constructive engagement to avoid the costs of prolonged rivalry.
Thank you for joining us on this detailed exploration of the Middle East power struggle between Iran and Saudi Arabia. In our final section, we will summarize key takeaways and reflect on what listeners can learn from this complex and evolving story. As we reach the conclusion of our in-depth discussion on the Iran-Saudi Arabia power struggle, it's clear that this rivalry is multi-layered and deeply rooted in history, religion, politics, and economics. Neither country's ambitions can be understood in isolation, as both have regional and global impacts. From religious identity and political governance to oil economics and proxy conflicts, the complexity requires careful analysis to avoid simplistic conclusions.
One of the key lessons is that religion, while significant, is only one part of the rivalry. The Sunni-Shia divide is intertwined with political ambitions, historical grievances, and strategic calculations. Both Iran and Saudi Arabia use religious narratives to mobilize support and justify policies, but their competition extends far beyond theology. Understanding this helps clarify why the conflict persists, despite efforts to frame it as solely sectarian.
We've also seen how their distinct political systems shape their approaches. Iran's Islamic Republic blends theocratic and republican elements, with power concentrated among religious leaders. Saudi Arabia's absolute monarchy relies on hereditary rule and religious legitimacy tied to its custodianship of Islam's holiest sites. These governance models influence decision-making, domestic stability, and foreign policy priorities, contributing to the rivalry's persistence.
Economic factors, especially oil, remain a critical dimension. Saudi Arabia's control over global oil markets and its ability to influence prices contrast with Iran's constrained exports due to sanctions. Both countries recognize the importance of economic diversification amid changing global energy trends. Their competition in this arena impacts global markets and shapes alliances, adding another layer to the struggle.
Proxy conflicts across Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq demonstrate how the rivalry plays out on the ground, often at great human cost. Support for armed groups allows both countries to project influence without direct confrontation, but it fuels instability and suffering. These conflicts highlight the challenges of resolving deep-rooted disputes when local dynamics are entangled with broader geopolitical competition.
The involvement of global powers such as the United States, China, and Russia further complicates the situation. Their strategic interests, alliances, and policies affect the balance between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Whether through military support, economic partnerships, or diplomatic mediation, these external actors shape regional dynamics and the possibilities for peace or conflict escalation.
Recent diplomatic efforts show that despite deep mistrust and rivalry, there is room for dialogue. Successful diplomacy requires addressing underlying causes, including political legitimacy, regional influence, and security concerns. While challenges remain significant, ongoing talks and confidence-building measures offer hope for reducing tensions and promoting stability.
Looking ahead, the future of the Iran-Saudi Arabia rivalry is uncertain, with scenarios ranging from continued conflict to cautious cooperation or transformative change. Domestic politics, economic pressures, technological advances, and international diplomacy will all play roles in shaping outcomes. Recognizing this complexity is vital for policymakers, analysts, and anyone interested in the region's future.
Thank you for listening to this comprehensive exploration of the Middle East power struggle. We hope this discussion has provided you with a clearer understanding of the factors driving the rivalry and the prospects for the region. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you listening from? And what is your perspective on today's topic? Your engagement helps us create more insightful content.
If you found this podcast valuable, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the English Globe for more in-depth discussions on international relations and global affairs. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes where we will explore other critical topics shaping our world today.
Until next time, thank you for joining us on the English Globe. Stay informed, stay curious, and keep learning.